This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Now, Japan says it has raised the issue of auto tariffs with Washington after President Donald Trump threatened to impose 25% levies on car imports as early as April. Now, the U.S. slams China's dangerous helicopter maneuvers in the South China Sea amid escalating tensions with the Philippines over sovereignty in the disputed waters. Now, Australia's spy chief warns of rising espionage and sabotage threats targeting its military over the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal with the US and Britain. And the UN nuclear watchdog chief inspects soil storage sites near Fukushima Daiichi, assessing ongoing decontamination efforts. Also in East Asia tonight, Donald Trump's foreign aid freeze is hitting projects all over the world, from food for refugees to medical research. Can China fill that void? We ask an expert. And move over, Disney. Chinese movie Ne Zha 2 takes in more than $1.7 billion in just 3 weeks, making it the highest grossing animated film of all time. Japan says that it has raised the issue of auto tariffs to the U.S. government after President Donald Trump threatened to slap levies of about 25% on car imports. Now, he's promised more details on the 2nd of April. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi says that Tokyo will examine the new measures closely before responding. Tokyo had asked for exclusion from Mr. Trump's reciprocal tariffs when its foreign minister met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio last week. While Mexico and Canada are in the firing line, so are car makers in Japan and South Korea. Now, both these Asian nations are ranked among the top 5 countries for light vehicle imports by value into the U.S. last year. Tuesday's duties also target pharmaceutical and semiconductor imports, triggering concern in chip powerhouse Taiwan. The U.S. president did not specify whether the measures would affect specific countries or apply to all vehicles imported to the U.S. Canada says businesses are now forced to reassess their reliance on the U.S. The country was previously granted a 30-day reprieve after Mr. Trump imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum earlier this month. Well, despite all that backlash, Mr. Trump says the tariffs have gained positive reception.
And because of what we're doing economically and through tariffs and taxes and incentives, they want to come back into the United States. And we'll be announcing various very large companies, the biggest actually, and they'll be coming back, having to do with chips and having to do also with cars and lots of other things.
China has condemned the sweeping tariffs at a World Trade Organization meeting. Beijing's ambassador to the WTO says that the levies risk triggering inflation, market distortions, and even a global recession. The U.S. has condemned what it calls dangerous maneuvers of a Chinese Navy helicopter in the South China Sea that threatened the safety of a Philippine aircraft. Well, the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines called on Beijing to refrain from coercive actions and to settle disputes peacefully in accordance to international law. Yesterday, Manila accused a Chinese Navy helicopter of reckless actions when it flew within 3 meters of its aircraft that was conducting surveillance over the disputed Scarborough Shoal. Now, Manila said it endangered the lives of its pilots and passengers. Beijing, however, said that the Philippine aircraft illegally intruded into China's airspace, accusing Manila of spreading false rumors. The Scarborough Shoal has been the site of repeated confrontations between China and the Philippines, while Beijing claims almost the entire South China Sea, putting it at odds with several of its neighbors. Now, this incident comes less than a week after Australia rebuked China for what it calls unsafe military conduct. Canberra said a Chinese fighter jet released flares within 30 meters of a surveillance plane patrolling the South China Sea. Beijing, however, said that the Australian plane had intruded into the airspace around Seashore Islands, also known as the Paracel Islands, which Vietnam and Taiwan also claim. Meanwhile, Beijing says it opposes Vietnam's construction activities on the disputed Bark Canada Reef, claiming that it is part of China's territory. It says it has always opposed the illegal occupation of islands and reefs by other countries. A study by China's Ministry of Natural Resources shows that Vietnam has expanded the disputed reef by 10 times since 2022 through land reclamation. The reef has been occupied by Hanoi since the 1980s. Now, Australia's spy chief has issued warnings of growing espionage and sabotage threats from foreign intelligence services, including those friendly to Canberra, in his annual assessment of the country's national security outlook. And for the very latest, Roger Maynard, well, he joins us live from Sydney. So, Roger, first up, are there any specific details from Mr. Burgess on some of these threats that he says Australia is facing?
Well, yes, there were, but this was a sobering and alarming assessment of the security challenges facing Australia today. Mike Burgess, the director of ASIO, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, did not mince his words. In a wide-ranging and extremely disturbing annual threat assessment, he revealed that ASIO had prevented attempts by hostile foreign countries to assassinate or harm critics in Australia, and he predicted that the current wave of anti-Semitic attacks in this country had far from plateaued. Well, if his speech was designed to put Australians on tenterhooks regarding their safety, he certainly succeeded. He spoke of rising nationalist violence and increased threats of terrorism. Australia, he emphasised, was effectively facing the worst security environment in half a century. The ASIO chief revealed how his organisation had identified at least 3 different countries which had plotted to physically harm people living here. In some cases, there were grave fears for the lives of those being targeted. In one operation, a foreign intelligence service tried to silence an Australian-based human rights activist. Another hostile foreign intelligence service wanted to harm or possibly kill individuals on Australian soil. Now, Mr. Burgess said the plot was part of a broader effort by the regime in question to eliminate its critics, including activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens. It goes without saying that plots like these are repugnant, he made clear. They not only involve plans to hurt people, they are shocking assaults on Australian sovereignty and the freedoms we hold dear. I tell you.
Roger, I just want to pick up on what you said about the spy chief raising the issue of sabotage by these so-called foreign states. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What else do we know about that?
Well, Mr. Burgess was at pains not to name names here, although one can assume that China was among those 3 or 4 countries he talked about. Even so, that won't foster cordial relations between Australia and China. Mr. Burgess claimed that multiple foreign regimes continually attempted to monitor, harass, intimidate and coerce cooperation from Australians and those who call Australians home. Turning to the war in the Middle East, he suggested that although it had not exactly inspired terrorism here, it had exacerbated division, elevated intolerance, and undermined social cohesion. The threat of terrorism, which had been raised to probable in 2024, was unlikely to be lowered in the near future, he warned. He also sounded an alarm over the likelihood of other nations attempting to meddle in Australia's upcoming general election, and he warned Australia and ASIO will be watching. I tell you.
Many thanks for that report. Roger Maynard speaking to us live from Sydney. Now, in other news, New Zealand says it must reset ties with the Cook Islands government after its Pacific neighbour signed several deals with China without consultation. Foreign Minister Winston Peters says that Wellington and the people of Cook Islands remain in the dark about all but one of the agreements signed in Beijing last week. He says the opaque dealings are in an attempt to test constitutional ties with New Zealand. Well, the deal that has been made known is the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership with China, and it covers areas such as the economy, infrastructure and seabed mining, but excludes security matters. Well, the Cook Islands is a self-governing country, but it does depend on New Zealand for financial support, and both sides are required to consult on defence, foreign policy and security issues. The deal with China follows an attempt by the Cooks to create its own passports and citizenship, but that was dropped after Wellington voiced its disapproval. Well, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog has visited soil storage facilities near Japan's Fukushima Daiichi power plant to inspect the decontamination efforts. Now, as part of a massive cleanup, about 13 million cubic meters of contaminated soil have been removed from the Fukushima area. Now, that's enough to fill 10 stadiums. The soil is being stored in interim facilities across 16 square kilometers of land. If it's confirmed to be safe, most of the soil will be used in infrastructure projects, such as building embankments for roads and railways. The remaining material will be transported outside of Fukushima for disposal, with cleanup to be completed by 2045. Now, Mr. Grossi's visit follows Tokyo's approval of an energy plan that marks a return to nuclear power. After the Fukushima meltdown, Japan pledged to reduce its reliance on nuclear power, but it removed that commitment from its latest strategic energy plan, driven by growing energy demands from AI and microchip factories and a shift towards clean energy. Japan aims to make renewables its top energy source by 2040, with nuclear power expected to supply 20%, up from 5.6% in 2022. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency has been monitoring Japan's efforts to decommission the plant, a process that is expected to take decades. 880 tons of radioactive debris have yet to be removed from the reactors. A court in Japan has sentenced a man to 10 years in prison for the attempted murder of former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in April 2023. Ryoji Kimura, aged 25, threw a homemade pipe bomb at Mr. Kishida as he was about to make a speech at an election event in the city of Wakayama. Now, the explosion caused minor injuries to a police officer and a member of the public. Mr. Kishida managed to escape unharmed. During a search of Kimura's home, police found suspected gunpowder and pipe-like tools. The prosecutors sought 15 years jail for Kimura, reportedly calling the attack a malicious terror act. But Kimura said he had no intention to kill Mr. Kishida. The incident occurred less than a year after former Premier Shinzo Abe was shot dead at an outdoor election campaign event. South Korea's judiciary is facing growing pressure from supporters of President Yoon Suk-yeol that's fueling concerns that tensions over his impeachment trial could further deepen divisions in the country. Well, interim head judge Moon Hyung-bae has been leading the high-stakes proceedings, and as the trial reaches its final phase, has been targeted by an extensive disinformation campaign led by Yoon's Conservative Party and its allies. Among one of the most defamatory claims against Judge Moon was the accusation that he shared child pornography online and has been debunked as untrue by AFP news agency. But it's not the only false information being peddled against him and his fellow judges. Doctored images have been circulating of Mr. Moon delivering a speech in front of a Chinese flag, which Yoon supporters seize upon as proof of his allegiance to communism in China. President Yoon previously claimed without evidence that China interfered in South Korea's elections. The suspended president's supporters have been staging daily rallies outside an apartment building where Judge Moon is said to live. 87 people were also arrested a month ago after pro-Yoon protesters attacked authorities and broke into the Seoul Western District Court following its decision to grant a formal arrest warrant for President Yoon. Mr. Yoon's impeachment trial has entered its last stages in the Constitutional Court, with lawyers offering summarized arguments yesterday after weeks of evidence from high-ranking officials. The first hearing in the impeachment trial of Prime Minister Han Duck-soo started today in the same court. Well, the break is up next, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, HSBC details the impact of CEO Georges El-Hedri's overhaul for the first time, as it reports market-beating earnings. And later, Vietnam's parliament approves a multi-billion-dollar project for a rail line that links to China's western region. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. You're just in time for business news with none other than Olivia Mazuki. And Liv, we're talking about HSBC. Apparently, they've just reported an impressive earnings report for 2024. Give us more details.
Well, the lender has it beat expectations with their first year and their full year earnings. It came better than market expectations. It also gave an insight into the new chief executive's overhaul. So HSBC says the restructuring plan of new CEO Georges El-Hedri will yield $1.5 billion in annual cost savings by the end of 2026. The Asia-focused lender booked 2024 earnings that beat market expectations. It also announced a new $2 billion share buyback, which it plans to complete before its next earnings filing. Now, the London-based bank posted a near $12 billion revenue for the quarter ended in December, which is down 11% on year. Still, pre-tax profit jumped 133% compared to the year-ago period. Now, for the full year, HSBC was riding on the strong momentum in the final quarter, beating estimates with some $65 billion revenue and $23 billion profit. The bank's strong performance comes against a backdrop of restructuring, which has led to the closure of some of its units, as well as the slashing of its management ranks. Mr. El-Hedri, who took the helm nearly 6 months ago, has been spearheading one of the biggest upheavals for the bank in decades. The changes include redrawing HSBC's operations into Eastern and Western units, closing key parts of its investment banking business, and merging 2 of its 3 main units. In the process, it had cut back on an expensive layer of senior bankers. We see upbeat trade for HSBC shares in Hong Kong, which ended the session well in the money. It's managing a positive open in London as well. Vietnam is taking steps to further boost trade ties with its largest partner, China. Its parliament today approved plans for an $8 billion rail link from its largest northern port city to the Chinese border. It will run through some of Vietnam's key manufacturing hubs, home to Samsung, Foxconn, Pegatron, and other global giants. Many of them rely on a regular flow of components from China. The route will stretch 390 kilometers from the port city of Haiphong to the mountainous city of Lao Cai, which borders China's Yunnan province, and will also run through the capital, Hanoi. Vietnam says a feasibility study for the Haiphong-Lao Cai Railway will begin this year, and it wants the line finished by 2030. Construction of the railway was backed in a vote by 95% of its parliamentarians. Part of the funding will come from China. It is one of 2 railway lines that Vietnam plans as part of its 2 corridors, One Belt initiative, which connects to Beijing's Belt and Road program. The approval comes over a year after the neighbors pledged to deepen relationships during Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Vietnam as Beijing seeks to counter growing U.S. influence with Hanoi. Vietnam is heavily reliant on exports to drive its economy and has been looking to ramp up its investment in infrastructure. The South Korean government will be buying thousands of unsold new homes. It's a bid to support the country's ailing construction industry, which is made worse by weak domestic demand. Acting President Choi Sang-mok said a government body will purchase the empty dwellings in provincial regions to be utilized for public rental housing. He added that financial institutions will also be given incentives to provide more mortgages for home buyers. This will be South Korea's first such initiative since 2010. It seeks to lend support to the construction sector, which has seen a drop in orders caused by a cooling property market and weak economic activity. As of the end of last year, more than 21,000 new homes remain unsold, the highest number in a decade. But many experts question the impact of this move on the recovery of the real estate market without addressing the root issues. Population decline and lack of tax support measures call into question if this is merely a stopgap measure. Japan's exports rose for a 4th consecutive month in January, led by auto shipments to the U.S. The growth signaling strong demand and strong global demand underpins the country's economic recovery. But experts say higher Trump tariffs can cause a sharp drop-off. Total exports rose more than 7% year-on-year. And imports grew nearly 17% in January from a year earlier. U.S.-bound shipments climbed 8%, weaker yen also boosting the value of exports. The solid trade report came after GDP data released earlier in the week. showed the economy grew faster than expected in the October-December quarter. This is strengthening the case for the central bank to continue raising interest rates. The U.S. president announced today to impose the auto tariffs of around 25%, and it has sparked concern from Tokyo. Japan is an export-reliant economy, and the U.S. is its biggest export destination, accounting for $138 billion worth of goods, with automobiles representing roughly 28% of that. Analysts say large tariffs are likely to force automakers such as Toyota and Honda to reshuffle their global production. Currently, the U.S. passenger car tariff rate stands at 2.5%, while a 25% tariff is levied on highly profitable imported pickup trucks. A Nomura economist estimates that 25% tariffs on autos and auto parts could push down Japan's GDP by as much as 0.2% over 2 years. Japanese automaker shares skidding today on news of those higher tariffs. Toyota dropped around 2%, Honda and Nissan Motors also declining by around the same margin. New level unlocked for crypto enthusiasts in Hong Kong. The financial regulator there is considering approving new virtual asset products as derivatives and margin lending for certain market players. Securities and Futures Commission Chief Julia Leung says Hong Kong wants to boost its positioning as a digital assets hub and expand its services to investors. The ambition has been in the works since 2022, following Beijing's sweeping ban on all crypto transactions in mainland China the year before. Hong Kong has since launched the first spot crypto exchange-traded funds in Asia and other initiatives. The regulators have so far issued 9 licenses for Virtual Asset Trading Platform, or VATP. Among those granted VATP is Bullish Group, a crypto exchange platform which owns news portal Coindesk.com. While cryptocurrency's most popular token, Bitcoin, has more than doubled last year. It hit an all-time high of around $109,000 on January 20th, the day of Trump's inauguration. It has since pulled back to stand at about a 95,000 level. And you're up to date in business, Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Olivia, for that. Well, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, a freeze on U.S. foreign aid is giving other nations an opening to build soft power. Will China or even Japan step up? We'll take a deep dive. And despite privacy concerns elsewhere, local governments across China embrace DeepSeek, incorporating the AI into services, from hotlines to processing documents. Well, Japan says it has raised the issue of auto tariffs with Washington after President Donald Trump threatened to impose 25% levies on car imports as early as April. The U.S. accuses China of dangerous helicopter maneuvers in the South China Sea amid escalating tensions with the Philippines over sovereignty in the disputed waters. And the UN nuclear watchdog chief inspects soil storage sites near Fukushima Daiichi, assessing ongoing decontamination efforts. U.S. President Donald Trump's freeze on foreign aid has thrust the global aid system into uncertainty. Now, the move has sparked outrage in the international community for the projects it impacted far away from the U.S.
This South African lab may be close to a breakthrough in the fight against HIV, but its researchers have had to stop work after U.S. President Donald Trump hit pause on foreign aid.
One of our mRNA vaccines that had been tested on the rabbits has shown quite remarkable immune response.
That's lab technician Nodzipo Mlotwa. After that promising result, she and her colleagues at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg made 4 new versions and sent them off for preclinical tests. Those blood samples are now sitting untouched in a freezer. A trial of a separate vaccine candidate, which was about to be tested on humans, is also on ice. Trump in January ordered a 90-day halt on all foreign aid programs to see if they align with his America First foreign policy. Separately, he's also moved to cut all funding to South Africa to oppose its land reform policy and its genocide case against US ally Israel. That's thrown the country's vaccine researchers into disarray. With some of the most groundbreaking studies coming from South Africa, they say the pause spells bad news for the world. About 40 million people across the globe are living with HIV, latest UN figures show, including more than 1 million in the US, according to the country's data.
And despite the criticism, the White House isn't backing down. The head of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, and President Trump continued their criticism of USAID, calling its work corrupt. The suspension of the aid agency has brought about the question of who can fill the void. USAID administered billions of dollars in financial aid distributed all over the world. In 2023 alone, it provided more than 40% of all global humanitarian assistance, amounting to nearly $72 billion. Now, its programs in nearly 180 countries also created markets for American exports. Major powers such as China and Russia have followed suit with their own soft power projects vying for dominance. Now, for more on this, let's bring in Professor Steve Tsang, Director of SOAS China Institute that's based in London. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. Clearly, we've seen the wide percussion of over USAID shutting down. It has upended lives as well as livelihoods. Professor, what exactly have been the reactions from countries across Asia and particularly China?
Well, countries in Asia or elsewhere which have been benefiting from the American aid would be in distress. Countries in Asia like Japan, which has been a strong American ally and supportive of American soft power, is looking at how it can help a bit. China sees Donald Trump and Elon Musk as the new socialist version of Santa Claus, gifting gifts after gifts, and the crippling of USAID is a particularly powerful gift that Trump has given to China.
Interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I mean, we know that China, they typically use investment as a tool to build soft power. So does that mean that now Washington's retreat will give, Beijing all that space to fill that void?
Well, China will not be filling the void that the U.S. is leaving behind, because we are talking about parallel and different kinds of aids. China's soft power is based on the BRI project, which are mostly about loans and for infrastructural building. They really not much in terms of the Chinese overseas assistance program that are given to humanitarian aids or to the kind of aids which will be saving lives. The cutting off of the operations of USAID means that people in the global south will die. And people who lose their relatives to this change will become very resentful of the United States. And this will be hugely beneficial to Chinese soft power because it will be hugely damaging to American soft power. China is not going to come in and save the American bacon.
Right. And we can see the U.S., retreating. We have USAID. They talked about retreating from WTO, pulling out of that, the Paris Climate Accord. So all in now, to what extent do you think this has affected the American standing in the region?
Oh, I think the damage is absolutely enormous. American humanitarian aid has been a significant part of the post-war situations that enhance American soft power globally. When it's happening, people are not paying that much attention to it, but when it is being withdrawn, people will see the difference happening, and that is already happening. And the prospect that this may continue at least for 4 years is something which is deeply distressing to people who have been benefiting from U.S. humanitarian aid.
Now, China, they've said that, its aid doesn't come without political conditions. But what are the implications in terms of the debt for these recipient countries? And could this be some kind of a new form of leverage for Beijing?
Well, China has always used its overseas development assistance program, and I use the word carefully, is development assistance, not development aids. Most of China's overseas development assistance program are loans. They are not gifts, and they have to be paid back. And China certainly will be using that. But it is not the same as to say that the Chinese government is creating deliberately debt traps. We have not seen any evidence that the Chinese government is systematically creating debt traps through those infrastructural projects. They have mostly restructured them when countries cannot pay back. But it will still increase Chinese government's leverage with those governments at the receiving end of Chinese loans and are not able to pay back.
Thanks for highlighting that, Prof, that China is all about development assistance and loans and not aid, as you're saying. Let's just bring in Japan here. What role do you see Tokyo perhaps playing in stepping up aid in the region?
I think Japan, in contrast, has been a country that has given a lot of genuine development aids. And Japan is a country that has the scope to fill in some of the gaps that will be left by the Americans. And Japan has a vested interest in helping the Americans out here, and at the same time enhance Japan's own international standing and reputation. So I would hope that the Japanese will do something to fill in some of the gaps. They will not be able to fill all the gaps left behind by the Americans.
Right. So as we look towards Japan possibly trying to fill some of those gaps, I want to talk about in terms of regional security, though. I mean, could the withdrawal of the USAID funding lead to possibly increased instability, and sort of alter the balance in regional security arrangements in any shape or form?
I think the effect on the regional security is rather limited. There will be some changes in terms of public opinions about the US and about China, but it does not change the big picture in terms of the local regional geopolitics. And where we don't know so far is what Trump will actually do with the security of the Indo-Pacific, and whether his focus on China is going to be beneficial to regional security or not. Trump's focus on Ukraine certainly has not benefited Ukraine and has not benefited European security. So I don't think we should assume that Trump putting his priority on China necessarily means it will be beneficial to American allies in the region.
All right, many points for us to ponder over. Thanks very much, Professor Steve Tsang, Director of SOAS China Institute, based in London. In other news, city governments across China are jumping on the AI bandwagon, launching online services featuring the Chinese AI chatbot, DeepSeek, and studying the potential uses of the technology. Officials in Guangzhou say the city has started using DeepSeek in its public web portals to deliver services more efficiently. The upgrade in its hotline services for handling complaints and suggestions has helped reduce average waiting time by more than 40%, while increasing the accuracy of call directing to 97%. Now, state media Xinhua says that tech hub Shenzhen has become the first city in Guangdong to fully implement the AI model across all government departments. The report says the government conducted citywide training sessions last week to teach cadres how to use the chatbot on a cloud platform. China's top diplomat Wang Yi also appeared to take the chance to promote the chatbot at a high-profile conference last week, suggesting the audience turn to DeepSeek to understand some of the Chinese proverbs he used. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra says that around 7,000 people rescued from illegal call center operations in Myanmar, are currently waiting to be transferred to Thailand. She adds that the government is acting quickly to resolve the issue amid a crackdown on scam centers along the Thai-Myanmar border. Well, Thailand has been working closely with China on that matter. Officials have been holding talks today, and they are expected to address the issue of cutting power, energy and internet to Myanmar border areas linked to scam facilities. It's all part of efforts to pressure its government and ethnic groups to suppress scam gangs. The Chinese Assistant Minister for Public Security, who has been in the region since Sunday, visited both sides of the Thai-Myanmar border ahead of large-scale repatriations of workers in the illicit industry. China is expected to fly home some 200 Chinese nationals found in scam-running compounds later today. Bangkok says the group will be flown back on a commercial aircraft. Thai police busted a $187 million fraud ring yesterday, arresting suspects including Chinese nationals. Hundreds of thousands of people trafficked by criminal gangs have been forced to work in scam centers that have sprung up across Southeast Asia. Despite operating for years, such facilities only recently faced renewed scrutiny after the rescue and return of Chinese actor Wang Xing. He was abducted in Thailand after being lured there with the promise of a job. South Korean actress Kim Se-yeon has been laid to rest in a funeral with family, friends and colleagues in attendance. The 24-year-old was found dead in her home on Sunday. And on Monday, the police told reporters that Miss Kim's death will be ruled suicide. Kim's death has triggered discussions on the impact of malicious online comments and sensationalized media coverage of celebrities. The 24-year-old was best known for her role in the 2010 Korean film The Man from Nowhere, and her career took a significant hit following a DUI incident in May 2022, when she crashed a vehicle into a roadside electrical transformer. She attempted to return to acting through a theatre play in 2023, but withdrew due to health issues. Now, if you or someone you know require emotional support, you can call these helplines. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi vows support for all efforts to bring about peace in Ukraine, but warns that the crisis in Gaza and the West Bank must not be sidelined. And Donald Trump takes aim at Ukraine after President Volodymyr Zelensky expresses surprise that Kyiv wasn't invited to talks on ending the war with Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy for Russia and Ukraine has arrived in Kyiv. Keith Kellogg will meet President Volodymyr Zelensky and says that part of his mission is to sit and listen. Mr. Kellogg's visit comes a day after the U.S. and Russia met in Saudi Arabia without Ukraine. He says the U.S. understands Kyiv's need for security guarantees against a new invasion once a peace deal is reached. And ahead of those discussions, President Trump took aim at Mr. Zelensky. He appeared to blame Kyiv for starting the war and signaled support for possible elections in Ukraine, which is one of Russia's key demands.
I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also.
Mr. Trump also expressed confidence in a potential peace deal for Ukraine after what he said were very good talks with Russia. Both Ukraine and Europe were not invited to the discussions in Saudi Arabia. The U.S. president dismissed concerns raised by Kyiv, which said it did not want a deal done behind the backs of key parties.
I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives.
Now, Mr. Zelensky was supposed to head to Saudi Arabia today after visiting Turkey, but his trip has been postponed. Reuters reports he did not want to give legitimacy to the talks that Kyiv was not invited to. Now, he insisted Ukraine must be part of any talks to end the war in his country.
Я переконаний, для України, для нашого регіону і для Європи принципово, щоб будь-які перемовини щодо закінчення війни відбувались не за спиною у ключових суб'єктів, яких зачіпають наслідки російської агресії.
America's top diplomat Marco Rubio says that no one is being sidelined as he held talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Riyadh. They agreed to establish high-level teams to continue negotiations. Mr. Rubio warned that all sides must be prepared to compromise for a deal to be struck.
In order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides. We're not going to predetermine what those are. We're certainly not going to negotiate this today or in a press conference for that matter. But and there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions as well that have been imposed.
The Russians reportedly did not offer any concessions during those discussions. Mr. Lavrov said Moscow will not accept the presence in Ukraine of troops from any NATO member, something the Europeans are exploring.
Мы объяснили нашим сегодняшним коллегам, что президент Путин многократно подчеркивал, что расширение НАТО, поглощение Украины Североатлантическим альянсом – это прямая угроза интересам Российской Федерации, прямая угроза нашему суверенитету.
The Riyadh talks mark a return to high-level engagement between the U.S. and Russia, the first since the invasion of Ukraine. Kate Fisher has more on the reset in ties.
It appears to be a tectonic shift in US policy towards Russia. During the Biden administration, Russia was kind of the world's pariah. It was isolated. It was really heavily sanctioned. And yet, in Riyadh on Tuesday, that seemed to change. There were very, very positive readouts from the meeting between the two sides. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that there are incredible opportunities for the US to partner with Russia, and he was talking about geopolitical opportunities, but also, he said, economic and investment opportunities. There is also plans for a summit between Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, and US President Donald Trump. Donald Trump indicating that that could happen if some kind of truce is achieved with Ukraine and Russia before the end of February, and also promises to reinstate ambassadors in both countries. So a huge change in US policy, and a change that has really shocked most of the European leaders and, of course, Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky, and is exactly what analysts suggest Vladimir Putin was hoping for.
The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that Beijing supports all efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine. But he warned that other issues, including the resolution of the conflict in Gaza, should not be pushed aside. Well, he stressed that the Strip and the West Bank should not be sacrificed in international politics.
加沙和约旦河西岸都是巴勒斯坦人民的家园，不是政治交易的筹码。
Chairing a meeting at the UN Security Council, the Chinese foreign minister pressed for a two-state solution to the long-running crisis. Mr. Wang's statements come amid repeated calls by the US president to displace Palestinians from Gaza and turn the Strip into a Riviera of the Middle East. China assumed the UNSC rotating presidency this month as the US resets its foreign policy. Mitch McKen has more.
Amid rising concerns about the US withdrawal from major world bodies and organisations, the United States representative Dorothy Camille Shea did little to ease concerns from America's partners. Ms. Shea criticised various UN agencies, saying America wouldn't support the Human Rights Council, and said that UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, has a history of anti-Israel bias. She added that the country's future role in the organisation is now under review.
The United States is currently conducting a review of our support to the UN. We will consider whether the actions of the organisation are serving American interests and whether it can be reformed.
Today's meeting was chaired by China, which chose to begin its presidency with a signature event focusing on multilateralism. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi told the Council that members' inability to work together is impairing its ability to make any meaningful changes.
各国相互依存，命运与共，谁都不能独善其身，不能搞弱肉强食，更不能重回丛林法则。团结比分裂好，合作比对抗好。 只有这样，各国才能共赢，世界才能实现和平和发展。
Huang Yi went further, and without naming other members specifically, he said any act of bullying, trickery or extortion is a flagrant violation of the basic norms of international relations. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres also reiterated the importance of reform, underscoring a number of crises the world is currently facing.
Excellencies, global solidarity and solutions are needed more than ever. The climate crisis is raging, inequalities are growing, and poverty is on the rise. As this Council knows well, peace is getting pushed further out of reach, from the occupied Palestinian territory to Ukraine, to Sudan, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and beyond.
While UN leaders are hoping for meaningful reform at the Security Council to address the world's crises, the United States' decision to review its participation altogether will be causing alarm bells both within the organisation and among world leaders. Mitch McCann, CNA, New York.
A mischievous child with special powers has conquered China's box office, setting a new global record. Well, Ne Zha 2 is now the highest-grossing animated movie of all time, beating Disney's Inside Out 2. Ne Zha is a well-known child deity in Chinese folklore. The fantasy epic opened in China about 3 weeks ago and has been packing the cinemas. And as of last night, it has raked in $1.72 billion globally, with most of the takings from China. Well, its success has become a point of pride for some Chinese, who hope that the movie will go on to conquer the world. The film has been released in North America and Australia, among other places, but overseas takings are more modest at $10 million. Ne Zha 2 will open in Hong Kong this weekend.
我哋好高興啦！今日啦，哪吒2啦係香港放映嘅，我哋係知道咯，係呢個電影咧傳揚中國文化，同埋充分體現我哋文化自信、民族自信。我哋期望更多嘅優秀國產電影喺香港放映。
And that wraps up East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for your company.